We obviously recognize this is going to be a little bit more challenging because of the technical issues. Paki did send out some information on if you are having a hard time connecting, please call that helpline and we'll be able to hopefully get you connected. So with that, I just want to give you a quick update on our process. And as you all know, the process is very flexible, and it's flexible by design. We want to make sure that we're able to work through, obviously, a really more of a collaborative process with the technical management committee and be able to hopefully put a plan together at a time that you are all ready. So as you can imagine, it may take a little bit longer to put a plan together, but we all recognize that there is some time, and we're able to work through our schedule and work on a plan. I'm grateful, obviously, to you all for your work, but at the same time, our technical management committee liaisons, John Bernal and Jamshid Mehta, they've been very helpful. They've been communicating with TMC members and getting the TMC members ready to participate and support your efforts. Chairman McGovern also sent a letter to the TMC asking the TMC to start working on developing a list of projects, if you will, and be able to bring that information to you hopefully relatively soon, possibly at the next meeting, and be able to dive into the next phase of our discussion. As you all recall, I believe if you look at the diagram, we're still in phase 2. We haven't dived into phase 3 yet. Phase 3 obviously is going to be a little bit more extensive, but at the same time, it's a iterative process that will go back and forth, check the goals, check the priorities, check them against proposed investment plan, and make sure that we develop a well-balanced plan. So I just want to make sure that everybody just kind of remembers where we are on the diagram as far as the efforts that you're all going to be taking on. In my opinion, we're still in phase 2 and starting to move into phase 3. But again, I want to remind everybody, even once you're in phase 3, it doesn't mean that you can step back and look at some goals and alignment and make sure that whatever you all recommend at the end of your process is consistent with those priorities. Throughout the process, and we've reminded everybody about this all along, throughout this process, there's going to be extensive public engagement, public involvement, whether it's in the form of input or in the form of feedback. Every single step of the way, we'll find opportunity to be able to go back and gauge public support for the plan. Paki will talk about that a little bit more later in the agenda, but I just want to remind you that throughout this process, there's going to be a very extensive public involvement process leading all the way up to the stage that you submit a recommendation to the RTA board, and even at that time, the RTA board would like to gauge the public support and interest before they call for an election. So throughout the process, we'll make sure that we keep everybody informed on where we are on every step and what we hope to accomplish by putting a plan together that is truly a citizen-driven plan. Again, I'm grateful to the TMC members. I've been coordinating with the TMC chair as well, and the TMC is ready to start providing you some support, and that should hopefully, moving forward, there's going to be a lot of discussions within CAC that would move to the TMC and then from TMC back to the CAC. So that's really a loop opportunity for discussion, feedback, support, and that phase is definitely is going to be mainly in phases of 3 and 4. Phase 4 is going to be really the critical phase. That's when you start refining the plan. So in the meantime, everything that's being discussed obviously is going to remain in a very preliminary draft format. The refinement is where you really truly get to the details of the plan and what ultimately would end up being in the plan for a recommendation to the board. So again, just a very high level review of where we're at, where we hope to go. Just as a reminder, and I get this question quite frequently, as a reminder, the RTA board ultimately would have to review and ultimately act on your recommendation. At that time, that's when they would decide when it's the right time to request to put the plan and the extension on the ballot. That conversation really needs to happen once there is a draft plan. So we want to make sure that we continue to work with you and the TMC to move the draft plan forward so they can start having that conversation. With that, Mr. Chair, don't have anything else to add other than just a reminder that whatever ends up being in the RTA plan, also by federal law, is required to be in the regional long-range plan for the community. And we know that these two go hand in hand, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the timing is right. So currently, we're looking at updating our long-range plan, but obviously we're not ready to integrate anything from the RTA next plan into that update. So it's reasonable to assume once we have an RTA plan, then we would have to go back and most likely, possibly not, but most likely we would have to update our long-range plan one more time. And that's the phase when we would ask the CAC to be able to assist us in that long-range plan update once the RTA plan is being recommended and approved by the public. So with that, Mr. Chair, I can answer any questions if you have any questions. If not, I'll pass it on to you.
Any questions for Farhad? Very well. Let's move on to item 3 on our agenda, which is approval of our June 8th meeting minutes. Hope everyone's had a chance to look at them. If you have any questions or comments about those, please speak now. In that case, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Very good. Do we have a second? I'm sorry, I missed who made the second.
Arlen.
Thank you, Arlen. Very well. Any other comments on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Chris Maltz, aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Very well, thank you. Motion passes. We will move on now to our informational part of the meeting, items 4 and 5. And I believe Rick Ellis from PAG RTA will provide us with some corridor improvements element information. Are you there, Rick?
I am here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be back with you again. I wanted to take this time to follow up and provide more information and expand upon the presentation I'd given you back in January of this year when I presented a basic overview of the RTA corridor elements. So wanted to come back on that, provide a little bit more insight on the elements, kind of what the delivery looks like, and showcase some of the examples from some of the successful projects that have been recently completed. Once the plan has been approved by voters, then the responsibility for the delivery of that really shifts over to the jurisdictions, and they're going to be responsible for really running with it from that point in time. And one of the key things at the beginning, prior to any project starting off, is going to be the RTA working with the local jurisdictions and identifying a lead agency. And that's the entity that's going to be responsible for the overall design development, for all the coordination, the interaction, and ultimately the implementation and full-on delivery. And it's critical that that is going to be a relationship with roles and responsibility that's not going to be focused on the scope, the schedule, the budget, but also ensuring that it conforms with the approved elements of the plan that have been approved by the voters. Now, you've heard reference to intergovernmental agreements, or what we often call IGAs, and those are going to be the key document that at the very beginning sets the relationship, roles, and responsibilities and outlines all the parameters that are going to be responsible and performed. Those will include things like what the public involvement is going to look like, the design development, including the technical documents. I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. The environmental clearances and approvals that may be required with the project, the final design, including the production of the plans, the specifications, the estimates, and all the associated clearances, and then ultimately the construction and implementing those agreed upon improvements. At the beginning of a project, the jurisdiction or the lead agency is going to assemble a project team, and they'll bring the consultant designers on board and assemble all the key staff that are going to be responsible for this. And one of the very first things, or one of the very first tasks that the project team is tasked with, is conducting a detailed assessment of the corridor, basically getting a full understanding of what the existing conditions are going to be like and what they're working with. That'll be an evaluation of the existing function of the roadway, what type of performance and behavior it's expected to serve. There will also be an evaluation of the multimodal capabilities, not only looking at the existing features out there, be it the sidewalks, bike lanes, bus stops, or pullouts, but also what the expected demand levels are going to be, and trying to evaluate the land use. Are there schools? Are there libraries? What type of generators are around in the area? There's also an evaluation of the traffic type and the flow. What kind of characteristics does the jurisdiction see, and what does the existing roadway experience? Is it a truck route? Are there a lot of truck volumes on that? Also, does it serve more of a commute route with a very distinct AM and PM peak? So it's going to be trying to get a very full and thorough evaluation of how the traffic performance is going to be. Safety is also one of the key elements, and this will be looking at the accident types, locations, features, any particular trends, also evaluating risks. A lot of the tools and techniques have become a lot more refined, and there's evaluation of potential that may change based on changes to the roadway, changes to traffic patterns, and changes in growth and development. It's an evaluation of the condition of the existing features, and that'll include the pavement, possibly the sidewalk, if there's any present, the drainage features, any bridges or structures. Are they in good shape, or are they been experiencing a high degree of deterioration? Have the drainage features been properly sized to match with current design standards? So it's a full scale and holistic evaluation of all those features and elements. Lastly, there will be an evaluation of the operational issues, and this is existing conditions. These are the things that the drivers and motorists are experiencing out there. Are there any problems with access management? Are there a bunch of driveways that serve multiple parcels or serve one parcel, or is it more of a restricted access? Are there any illegal behaviors or patterns that are being observed? People crossing against lights, people crossing mid-block where there's not designated facilities or designated crossings. So it's all those type of things that you probably see driving around in the area that can affect the overall capacity and functionality of the roadway. From that point in time, the project team now moves into the initial design. So once they've got a handle on what the existing conditions are, now it's kind of starting to form the vision of what this will look like and start working on the concept. And it'll include several elements on there. It'll be determining the multimodal aspects. Obviously, most roads are going to always be accommodating of all multimodal choices, so there will include bike and pedestrian facilities. But do sidewalks serve the best feature, or is it better used for a multi-use pathway? Also, when it comes to the transit activities, are pullouts going to be most effective, or do we want to look at using stops? The evaluation will also evaluate the alignment, and that means are there going to be any kind of shifts that the project team needs to make, and that can either be side to side, moving the alignment from one side to the other, and I can come back and talk about that in a little bit as to why that may be evaluated, or also taking out any dips or hills that may impact sight and visibility. So you've got both the up and down and side to side that's coming into play. Project team will also be working with the jurisdiction partners and stakeholders to evaluate the intersection configuration. Are there additional turning lanes needed? Do we need to add extra left turn lanes or right turn lanes? Or in some cases, as you've seen more recently, is a different intersection configuration more appropriate altogether? Grant Road is a nice example of this, where the project team and the jurisdiction have identified the use of indirect lefts as another tool and technique to help work with the traffic flow. Lastly, the project team will then evaluate the right-of-way that's needed, the additional property, if you will, that's going to be necessary to construct the improvements. Project team also works with the jurisdictions to establish phasing and staging. On some of the longer corridors that span multiple miles, there may be a necessary opportunity to break it into smaller, more manageable bite-sized pieces. And does that work better to work from one end to another? Or is there an opportunity and a benefit from working in from the outside ends and then saving the remaining piece in the middle to be completed? All that gets to be evaluated as to what's going to provide the most effective condition for building this and implementing it. As always, the project team, the lead agency, the jurisdictions are remaining focused on addressing performance issues, maintaining the functionality, and always differentiating clearly between wants and needs. Some perspectives to keep in mind as the project starts progressing in the design efforts. Design is both an art and a science. It's guided by a lot of codes, policies, procedures, laws that are a combination of the ones man-made as well as natural. Water doesn't flow uphill, as an example. Also, design efforts are very, very iterative. There's a good understanding of the trade-offs and ramifications. So oftentimes it's not just put one thing in place and run with it. It's what are going to be the pros, what are going to be the cons, what are ultimately going to be the benefits, and what are the impacts. It's also collaborative. It's working very closely with partners, stakeholders, and the public. There are many folks with many sources of input and many needs that need to weigh in. And the more effective that's done, the more effective the project can be in moving forward. As always, this relies on a high degree of technical data and information, as well as strong judgment decision-making. These are not going to be driven by whimsical decisions or by arbitrary or random desires. So it is based and rooted in science and by technical information. As the design progresses, there's a great number of steps that are going to be involved in this that the project teams will go through. You've heard many of these documents, efforts, all referred to. You can think of them as the building blocks. They're going to be the foundation for what the design will ultimately look for. And you've probably heard these acronyms referenced many times as you've heard project updates. Design concept report being the DCR, the environmental documents, which can take the form of environmental impact statements, environmental assessments, environmental assessment mitigation reports, or various others. There's technical reports that'll specialize on the particular elements and specialty disciplines that are needed to be tackled, such as bridges, drainage, traffic, noise, etc. Throughout the design, it's a continuous effort of essentially discovering the problem, identifying the solution, evaluating all the trade-offs, the impacts, and the alternatives that are available, and then making a final decision. And this is repeated over and over and over again throughout the design process. The goal is always constant progress. As the project team and the jurisdictions are moving through, they want to make sure that they're proceeding from the 15% milestone through the 30% milestone to the 60% milestone. There is really a key desire on behalf of all the project team members to keep moving forward, not backtrack, and not undo any previously agreed upon decisions. Once the concept has been finalized, which is typically for most jurisdictions, most projects, right around about the 30% level, then the focus really moves towards the implementation. And this is when a lot of the activity level starts ramping up in more earnest. It's a transition in the detailed design activities, and this will be production mode of the plans, the specifications, the estimate, and all the other key detail information that's going to be necessary for ultimate construction. It's also where the right-of-way activities pick up. Now you're starting the appraisals, the negotiations, and the back and forth dialogue about remnant parcels. Also, the utility coordination now starts in a much more involved and active discussion. Where are exactly the relocations going to be needed? What type of timeframes or seasonal restrictions may be in place? Is there a sequence to which utility needs to go first or which one needs to go second? There's also going to be more detailed assessment of the environmental impacts and the mitigation. Start looking at if there's any potential for banking, any potential for minimization, if there's any in lieu fee compensation that can be utilized. Also, part of this includes obtaining any permits, approvals, clearances, any of the other partners, resource agencies, or stakeholders that have that regulatory authority. They're going to be engaged in this effort as well. Ultimately, it culminates with the advertisements for construction and then constructing the agreed upon improvements. There's a key focus throughout this entire effort of being aware of the scope, the budget, the schedule, and a constant engagement with partner stakeholders and the public is critical and essential. Can't emphasize that enough because there are so many activities moving forward, all of these in parallel, that constant engagement, everybody has a role, everybody has a responsibility in ensuring the project can be brought forward to a successful completion. Once the project is done, then it can be thought of as simply, these are now improved facilities that are part of the maintenance inventory, which are all part of the system inventory that the jurisdictions are responsible for in the first place. So there were maintenance activities that were performed before the improvements are made, and likewise there will be maintenance activities that will be performed afterwards. These include all the regular and routine activities jurisdictions are responsible for, such as maintaining the drainage ways and the drainage features that have been constructed, maintaining the landscaping, ensuring that it's healthy, vibrant, and functional, maintaining the pavement, maintaining all the striping, pavement marking, and the signing, and making sure that the signal equipment is going to be functioning as intended. Any fully functional project, if it's well designed, been well constructed, and well implemented, is actually going to reduce some of these activities because state-of-the-art equipment will be used. And if you think of simply a roadway where there were numerous drainage crossings over the top of the road and the effort that had to be done to clean it up and remove all the debris beforehand, now that the water is going underneath, that activity has been eliminated or simplified greatly. So that's just a simple example. This slide I wanted to highlight just as an example to show that a jurisdiction always desires to have regular routine maintenance efforts, and this is their goal. This one deals with just pavement, but it can apply to bridges, structures, the striping, the signing, anything else. And it just highlights the importance of being on top of regular and routine maintenance activities to ensure that everything's working in optimal condition. If things are allowed to degrade, fall apart, fall behind the wayside, then ultimately it may be heading to a point where it gets into a state of disrepair, where there's more significant repair work activities needed, or in a worst case scenario, replacement of that feature may be required. I want to highlight now some of the key benefits that come around from a well-designed, fully functional corridor. These are some of the projects that have been built as a result of the first RTA, or the current plan we're operating with now. You may have seen a lot of these if you've driven around town and seen what the jurisdictions have been responsible for improving. So first and foremost, one of the key benefits out of any fully functional roadway corridor is going to be the improved safety. This can come in many forms. It can be the improved conditions out there with the elimination of non-standard features. In this particular case, is the addition of specialized elements such as a signalized crossing. This one's on the Grant Road corridor and shows a specialized crossing scenario to address both the vehicles as well as pedestrians and bicyclists, making sure that they can get across this corridor safely. The next goal is to reduce congestion and improve traffic flow. And this picture is of Tangerine Road and shows what the addition of dedicated turning lanes. You can see the ones that have been added for both right turns, left turns, as well as the additional through lanes and how that's going to improve the overall traffic flow capability and capacity of the roadway and corridor network system. This next project is out on the east end, out on Valencia, and represents the addition of the multimodal facilities. and we can accommodate these additional choices. And this one shows and highlights the addition of bike facilities as well as sidewalk. And there are numerous configurations and opportunities to mix and match these to ensure that they're providing dedicated space, dedicated functionality for those specific modal choices. The next one represents enhanced functionality, and that can come in the form of the elimination of the at-grade drainage conditions where you have washes or major waterways coming over the top of the roadway, or in this particular one where you're removing the at-grade railroad crossing. This is the Ina Road project that was recently completed, and in addition to already establishing or maintaining the grade separation with the interstate, this project also removed the railroad crossing so that we now have functional traffic conditions and flow, both east-west direction as well as across the interstate system as well. The last project shows the benefit that comes out of all this, which is enhanced economic vitality. This is achieved through the enhanced access, land use compatibility. In this case, you can see from the picture, it shows an example of how access management, consolidation of driveways, helping ensure that the spacing is better situated in relation to the intersection. All that provides a more smooth and effective flow as the system now can integrate with the transportation system, and the land use can now be done compatibly with the overall roadway network. This project was out on Houghton Road at one of the key intersections out there. In conclusion, I wanted to take just a second to leave you with a couple closing thoughts to address any kind of the misconceptions that are oftentimes out there. First and foremost, it's complicated. There are multiple steps involved. Project delivery does take time. So the jurisdictions working through this, the project teams, it isn't one of those things where you can snap your fingers and go, presto, we have a project, welcome to driving on it, and please enjoy. So there is a lot involved, as you've seen. There's also a lot of complexities, and in many cases, the jurisdictions are going to be looking to balance multiple needs. Some of those needs are competing when they're hearing from partners, stakeholders, the business community, residents, and citizens. When those align, that's a real easy situation to address, but when they don't, discussions for their evaluation and compromise is oftentimes going to be necessary. There's oftentimes a perception out there that the jurisdictions and the project teams may not be listening as closely as everybody would like. But requests, comments, and suggestions are often contrary to the codes, the policies, the procedures, even laws that I described about earlier. So that becomes an iterative effort to help educate, explain, and inform the public, the partners, and the stakeholders that are all involved with this to ensure that there's an understanding on why the improvements are being made. Because the ultimate goal at the end of the day is still to deliver the promise to the public in an on time, on budget, and with all the functional items highlighted to ensure that the corridor performs as intended and as approved by the voters. With that, Mr. Chair, I can take any kind of questions you have or provide any kind of extra explanation if you so desire.
Thank you, Rick. A lot of information there. So I would expect that there's probably some questions. Anybody want to start us off?
This is Arlen.
Arlen, go ahead.
Thanks, Rick. So question about the tie between the design of the project and the ultimate cost of maintenance of the project. I think most of our jurisdictions are like behind in maintenance because it's such an overwhelming thing. There was a lot of stuff that went without being properly maintained over the years. When you've got a new project coming in, if one project design might cost more to maintain, for example, than another, does that ever get considered, as well as the ability of the specific jurisdiction to raise the money to maintain that project, or is that just by nature just assumed?
As a general rule of thumb, and I'm kind of simplifying this because the slide and the information I presented was really just to show and highlight that maintenance is an ongoing effort that's associated with the roadway system and not tied to a particular project. Here in the Tucson metropolitan area and within the Pima County regional area around here, there's not quite the exotic features such as tunnel systems, ventilation systems that would go with that, movable bridges, or any of the things you may see that would traditionally lead towards a higher and more expensive or extensive maintenance and operational effort. If those do get included or incorporated into a project, if it has a unique drainage condition that requires something above and beyond what's normally done, then that's typically acknowledged, detailed, and discussed in the project and evaluated during those early design phases that I was talking about. As a general rule of thumb, I think the jurisdictions are well aware what the normal purview is, what the normal things can be taken care of, and what's normally required to stay on top of that. Going back to what I talked about, if the project can address all the deficiencies up front, the maintenance workload actually decreases significantly from that. So I think, fortunately, here in the area, the roadway network system and the projects we work to implement are going to be of the simpler in nature. And therefore, I think maintenance responsibilities can be dealt with and addressed as the projects are going on and identified well in advance.
Thank you.
It's kind of an interesting concept that you bring up, Arlen, which leads me to wonder whether factoring maintenance into kind of a prioritization process might be something to keep in our back pocket as a potential issue to help us differentiate among various competing corridor projects.
Yeah, I agreed. You know, it'd be interesting to have as part of the analysis of the proposed cost of maintenance over time and how that's proposed to be paid for each project. I mean, there may be a standard thing, but at least people will know, because we tend to think as you know, people that are working on building a project or designing the project, as well as citizens. Yeah, my job is done when the project's built and somebody else maintains it. You know, that's another department. And reality is it ought to be seen as seamless through the whole thing.
And as we've talked about in the past, we are asking the jurisdictions to commit to maintenance, but more importantly, perhaps, to kind of let the public know how they'll fund that maintenance. And
Agreed.
Although it's a stretch right now. It's a big challenge. So, okay, thank you. Other questions? Rick, do you have information with you about the corridors which are part of our current program, and perhaps some ideas about the completeness, if you will, of those corridors?
As a general assessment, let's see what I can provide based on the latest I've gotten from the project teams we're meeting with. Just to highlight some examples, then you can tell me if I'm going far enough or if I need to go further. The Valencia corridor from essentially the far west side at the Ajo Highway, there were numerous projects that essentially made improvements through the entire run all the way out to the east end at Houghton. The county is wrapping up the stages from essentially Ajo to, I believe, Wade. They're coming up on the final end of construction on that project, and the previous phases are all open and operating. The city has, moving to the east, a couple of the projects that were in the county jurisdiction were completed within the last few years. The Cold Valencia intersection was completed as of last summer, and the city has design activities on now the remaining piece going out to Houghton Road. The Silver Bell corridor, the city had built the southern piece from Grant to Goree. currently have design activities essentially finished, and they've moved into the archaeological efforts for the next piece that's going to go up to Camino del Cerro. Moving around further onto the northwest side of town, the La Cholla project, the county had built the section from McGee up to Overton, which included the new bridge over the CDO, and the town of Oro Valley is well underway and over 3/4 of the way complete with the section that'll take it up and match into Tangerine that was improved in a joint effort between the city, Marana, and Oro Valley, and finished up a couple years ago. The Grant Road corridor within the city is also several phases underway. The second stage was completed construction approximately a year ago. Stages 3 and 4 are well underway with design activities, right-of-way acquisition, and initial utility. Conversations have been started on that project, with the design efforts for the remaining stages 5 and 6 have just been started. Houghton Road continues to progress as well. There have been several stages that have been recently completed. The next section that's going from Marianne Cleveland Way to Valencia has been advertised and is pending award, with construction activities anticipated to start later this fall. And the next section going from Irvington to 22nd is under design as well. Does that give you kind of a sampling you were looking for, Tom, or is there something more you were looking for specifically?
No, I think that's just what I was hoping to hear. I kind of want the committee to begin understanding the corridors that exist and the ones that perhaps we will see as various jurisdictions provide their project lists. I think every one of those projects that you just listed, those corridors, go through multiple jurisdictions, and if not 2, then 3 or more. And I guess the question that I have about that is, how does the limit of a given corridor, or the importance of it, get settled among the various jurisdictions that perhaps have maintenance responsibilities for portions of it, and or experience varying levels of congestion at current periods, or have different needs, such as more transit within a portion of that corridor, or more bicycle or pedestrian traffic, say, within the city than on the outskirts of, say, a Houghton Road, as an example.
Flip a coin would be my flippant answer right now. Let me think about that. So the timing and the sequencing of any of the big roadway projects, corridors, and those enhancements was obviously, as it set forth in the 4 periods that were identified in the current plan. So that essentially helped with the prioritization of which ones needed to be in what level of construction activities and meet what type of timeframe commitments as identified and agreed upon by the voters. That helps get the initial framework out there. As I described, many of these roadways are going to have deficiencies, either in the form of traffic, drainage conditions are also very prevalent, or the lack of multimodal aspects, or they'll be experiencing significant severe congestion. I can just say that there are a lot of discussions that go on, especially with the ones that span multiple jurisdictions, something like a Houghton Road, something like a Tangerine, a Silverbell, where there were multiple parties involved. It was a lot of discussions back and forth, and it's not just one single kind of, well, let's go this route type of thing. It's iterative. It evaluates pros and cons, evaluates resources and capabilities of the lead jurisdictions or lead agencies. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but essentially that kind of helps identify when something will get going, or the combinations of those 2 things will then kind of identify how urgent is it, or should this one wait until sometime next year or the year after. Maintenance, you did bring up the maintenance responsibilities, and on many of these corridors that split the jurisdictions, there are already pre-existing agreements between the jurisdictions covering maintenance and operational responsibilities. So oftentimes those have been well established. As I said, these The roadway network is already an existing system that the jurisdictions are responsible for. And essentially, once the improvements are made, many of those agreements remain in place so that each jurisdiction continues to do what they've been doing all along. On a rare occasion, if a brand new roadway is built or a new segment is extended, then that may be cause to evaluate that, or if jurisdictional limits have changed. But for the most part, the agreements that were in place beforehand will be maintained throughout. Did that get to the question?
Helpful. Yeah, no, yeah, Rick, that's helpful. I also wanted to kind of get the committee to be aware of and anticipate their own participation in the process of identifying these true regional corridors. Remember, everything about the RTA plan is about regionality, and PAG and the RTA represent kind of that that spot where everyone comes together and they think about these trans-regional corridors, whether they be, you know, a Suntran type route, or they be bicycle, you know, paths or boulevards, or major corridor routes, major arterial roadways, but that it's within PAG where those conversations and that kind of regional thinking is occurring. And we want to, you know, be aware that that's actually occurring as we receive these jurisdictions' comments and project lists. So this may even be a question for Farhad. How exactly does that happen, and what do you see the CAC's role being in that development?
Sure, I'll be happy to touch on that. The technical management committee would be the filter that would help and assist the citizens committee on identifying some of those regional facilities. So we hope that the TMC will take a look at priorities, take a look at the goals that you have established, and then take a look at proposed projects and at least have the first pass on what they believe are consistent with your goals and are regional in nature. And then, as I mentioned earlier, then that'll be a process for CAC to look at it with TMC's perspective and input, and then obviously you would discuss it among yourselves and truly identify which one of those investments would be the most return on the investment, and they would be more regional in nature. And that's obviously a subjective conversation, but at some time along the way, we would be able to identify and hopefully be able to tell the story that some of these investments may have additional benefits, whether it's a land use compatibility issue, whether it's addressing a safety issue, going back to your goals. As long as they're addressing your goals in, you know, hopefully in this process, it would be a return on the investment. So your goals really identify that return.
Terrific. Thanks. Other questions from the committee?
Tom, this is Bruce Wright.
Bruce? I heard
Yes.
you, Bruce.
Given the regional nature of the corridors and notwithstanding the need to accommodate locational requirements, drainage, and adjacent development, to what extent are these corridors going to be designed with the same kinds of standardized features? And the reason I ask the question, because it seems to me that the greater predictability the public has in using these features, whether it's lagging less or rights or left turn lanes or hot crossings or whatever it might be, it increases the efficiency and safety of the system. So as these projects move across multiple jurisdictions, is there a focus or a principle about trying to come up with a common design for these major thoroughfares?
Generally, the answer is yes. So from my experience in the past, we would typically try to work with the partner jurisdictions to ensure that it had a seamless look as any type of motorist resident traveled throughout the area. Didn't want there to be a distinct difference between you've left a county section, you're now entering Oro Valley, or you're going from Marana into Oro Valley, or you're going from Sahuarita into the county. Didn't want there to be a marked or a distinctly different operational behavioral type of difference. There are some subtle differences between the jurisdictions, and those are necessary just based on the particular approach and design that are utilized. But overall, any project that is going to cross regional boundaries, regional jurisdictions, and become true regional in nature would try to minimize those to the greatest degree practical, so that lane width dimensions, those are going to be consistent throughout. The continuation of a multi-use pathway that may have been built in one jurisdiction will continue through in the jurisdiction in the same way. Any differences or distinctions that may be to them are going to be more reflective of the context of that surrounding area, not necessarily the differences between the jurisdictions.
Thank
So
you.
there is a focus, there is an awareness on that. I wouldn't think it would go as far as to say there's a regional standard, although we do have several things that have been adopted and are adapted to used in the regional and the PAG region specs, as well as details that all the jurisdictions refer to. But seeming within that, there are some differences, but should be very subtle and hopefully not noticed too much by the resident citizens and motorists. Does that answer your question, Bruce?
Yes, it does. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Other questions before we let Rick go? Very well. Thank you, Rick, very much. And we'll certainly be calling on you in the future for more input and more information as time is appropriate.
Thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it, and look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Very good. All right, let's move on to our next item on the agenda, which is review of our performance measures framework. And we have David Mitchell with PAG to talk to us. Are you there, David? I saw that you're on the phone. Is that right? Or are you now on TV?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And Rick, thank you for your insight on the corridor improvement process. Rick had alluded to the need to evaluate the performance of projects, and one method is the use of performance measures. My presentation today is an overview of how PAG will use performance measures to not only track the results and impacts of the next RTA plan, but also evaluate the effectiveness on the region's transportation and mobility networks. Shown here are these are the 10 adopted goals from the CAC guiding principles. These 10 goals will help define the performance measures that are used to evaluate the next RTA plan. Establishing goals is the first step toward an RTA plan that is performance-based, and I'd like to take a look at what that means to be performance-based to better explain. So with the use of performance measures, PAG's practices can include using performance-based principles in its planning and its programming exercises, so project delivery and long-term planning. A performance-based approach to drive investments and implementation strategies to accomplish the goals and objectives identified. That's the definition of a performance-based plan. In short, it is using the data to evaluate progress towards a desired outcome, in which, in our case, are those 10 goals from the first slide. So shown here are the 4 different goals that had the strongest agreement in the public survey that was conducted last fall. I'll go ahead and read through them. The first one is to improve the condition of existing roadways of the network. 92% had that marked as strongly agree. The second, provide efficient crosstown mobility. The third is reducing congestion. And the fourth, at 86+% is reducing crashes at intersections. So the question then becomes, what are some examples of performance measures that can be used to track these 4 goals and the other 6 that have been identified? Well, here are some example measures. These are the ones that could be used to evaluate the performance based on the goal. PAG has the ability and the access to the data to carry out the performance measures and to meet all federal requirements for a performance-based plan. The first goal area of reducing congestion, some example measures might be the percent of time a segment experiences measured congestion, or the average vehicle speed during peak hour. Those are ways that we might measure what you would call traffic or being stuck in slower travel times. We could measure that, and we have performance already on hand that can help evaluate that. The second goal, reducing crashes at intersections. We have access to safety data, which includes crashes, fatalities, serious injuries for automobiles, bicycles, pedestrians, basically all incidents that happen on roadway networks for the region. We can certainly track those, and we can use those to kind of normalize based on other data sets. And one case of that would be to use the vehicle miles traveled so that we can gauge a relativity for different intersections to compare them more across the board. The third goal, improving conditions of existing roadways. Example measures include looking at the percent of pavement and the percent of bridges that are in good condition. Rick had alluded to maintenance plans. Well, the data is tracked and available so that we can see where we currently stand and where we would need to focus more investments to bring anything that's in poor or fair condition into these good standards. And finally, the fourth goal of providing efficient crosstown mobility, we have means of looking at the percentage of vehicle miles traveled in severe congestion, again, traffic, and we can look at travel time index, which is a way that we can measure how often a corridor experiences expected travel times versus delayed travel times. So how do we evaluate performance? Well, one way is that we can track is by using performance measures to see how are we achieving or how are we making progress towards an established goal. We have access to the best available data. What we do is establish baselines, current condition data. We set long-range targets. What's a reasonable expectation to be at when the plant, when all the products of the plan are delivered. And then in the meantime, we track how do we do year over year. So we continue to collect the same data sets and see how we're performing. And we have different ways of analyzing, whether it's a year over year analysis, a 5-year average. If we're comparing them to other supporting data sets, there's multiple ways that we can use to track, and PAG has that ability. We can also gauge and measure the impacts that a project has on the existing network. Performance measures can be used to determine what types of impacts the plan has on current performance, meaning what's the number of poor roads that are currently experiencing poor condition or heavy traffic. How many of those roadways are being addressed in the plan? We can have a number for that. We can look at how many intersections are being addressed that have safety concerns, the ones that have high fatalities. We can see, how many of those intersections in the plan are bringing safety improvements. Third, we can use performance measures to evaluate projects. We can use performance measures, data, criteria, which is the assessment of existing conditions, and all that can be determined for a road segment, a corridor, or a complete package of projects. So there's 3 different lenses that we can look to apply performance measures practices. Basically, we can evaluate current conditions, see where performance issues exist, and then helps in turn for better decision making and project prioritization. For example, it could be used to identify projects where safety concerns exist, as I had previously stated. Here's a look at some of the types of reports that our region, some of our jurisdictions have access to when looking at projects. This approach can be used on a specific project that is being proposed. Performance conditions associated with an explicit corridor or a drawn project, for example, can be examined. And in this process, we can identify early on if there will be any performance issues or what the most pressing issues will be. We also can focus on how a single project can affect performance in areas of the overall network. another look at some of the types of reports and analysis that are all related to performance measures. We have created a performance reporting tool, and that provides details about the performance for specific projects that are being considered. The performance reporting tool we developed will provide key performance indicators that can be considered during the project selection process for RTA plan development. And these are all just illustration purposes. They're not actual projects. So in summary, PAG has the information and the tools necessary to carry out a performance-based plan for the next RTA plan. We can track the progress towards achieving the goals. We can estimate the impacts of a proposed plan on current conditions, and we can evaluate proposed projects for a performance assessment and get an inventory of different performance issues being addressed. So using the 10 goals that were established in the CAC guiding principles, PAG can track the progress toward reaching those goals, and we can measure the impact of the next RTA projects on our region's transportation and mobility networks. That's all I have, and I will now open it up to any questions. Thank you. Okay, just a reminder, if you are trying to ask a question, to unmute yourself, but if not, Tom, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, David. Do we have any questions from the committee? Out of curiosity, David, how many of our existing RTA plan projects that have been completed are being evaluated kind of in retrospect to see if we're experiencing the kind of improvements that we had anticipated or upon which we had based our priority decisions before in RTA 1?
Yeah, I might have to let Jim take the lead on this one, but as a supporting answer, I could tell you the measures that we are tracking are for our long-range plan, the 2045 RMAP. We are tracking over 45 different measures that will for certain be useful for RTA, the next RTA plan for consideration, and PAG has the ability to develop additional ones if necessary. But Jim, would you like to comment on how we're tracking RTA performance?
Just real briefly, we have been tracking RTA performance when we do the closeout reports after a project or corridor is completed, and we have completed project reports that we place into the RTA website. So that's one place where we can review things such as safety data and cost data for the completion of the project, as well as traffic information, ADTs and the like. When we did the original RTA, though, we really didn't have the performance measures in place at that time. So it's been kind of looking back at them after we've been completing them.
Yeah, what I had in mind was the thought that as we go to the public and say, these are the kinds of projects we suggest would be best for our plan, at some point it'd be helpful to show numbers that reflect the performance, I guess, of some of the projects that have been approved over the last 15 years. Maybe a segment that was done in quartile 1 of the plan that we now have 5 or 10 years of experience in observing, where we can say, thanks to this RTA project, we had this excellent response for safety. Or perhaps we'll see if we're using these, you know, at our current time to say the most important projects that we could put out are transit projects to show safety improvements that were done, or expansion, as an example of the transit system, resulted in corridor congestion reduction of X amount. Those kinds of metrics which we can use retrospectively, if you will, to inform our priorities going forward, as well as helping to sell, if you will, the expected efficiencies of and outcomes of these projects. That makes sense? I hear a bunch of crickets.
Mr.
this
Chair,
is-
if I may, I agree with you 100%. Obviously, we'll do that. And I think the point that Jim was trying to make was, at the time, back in 2005, when the plan was developed, we didn't have the baseline. But I like your suggestion, and we may even want to report back on the outcomes based on even your current goals, and demonstrate how that's been done, even in the absence of having those goals back in 2005. But yeah, we can definitely take a stab at that and continue to convey that message. And Pocky's item, the next item, she's going to touch on that a little bit as well.
Tom, this is Chris Schmaltz.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
And everyone, I think that's really important. Even more so in terms of than successes. I think those projects, we need to sort of have an assessment of those projects that were included in the plan that didn't necessarily achieve their goal that might have been identified. I think we learn from not failures. I'm not suggesting they're failures, but we learn from, okay, we here's what the goal was, and we didn't quite achieve that with this project. Here's what we thought it would do, and it's not really showing the results. I think that that's illuminating for purposes of identifying priorities for all of us to see what's the most effective use of available limited dollars. And so I'm very supportive of this idea of applying whatever performance measures we can to previous projects to help tell that story of here's why we've identified the priorities that we have in the project, to identify that we really have these metrics in mind when we're identifying projects to include in the next iteration of the RTA. So I think that that's very important.
Great. Well, we'll keep our eye on that, and I know that PAG does a lot of that and is in the midst of it and with the long range plan. So I'm anticipating a lot of good information, and I think you make a great point. In order to decide what to do in the new plan, we should look to see what worked and perhaps what changes could have been made or need to be made going forward. It's a new day at this point, and although Bruce didn't bring it up when he spoke, I was kind of expecting to hear what's going to be in the future. 10 or 20 years from now, do we expect that we'll have more technology-driven management of our system, and therefore we need to prepare for it in a way that we did not 20 years ago? So,
Tom,
I'd like to add another comment to that. We need to be, I totally support using the past information to move forward, but we need to be careful, because we need to understand that some of these projects are going to be in place and we're going to have data over a number of years, and we are going to be having projects that are just literally aren't finished or even in the ground yet. So, I think it's important to use the ones that have been done and finished to evaluate, but there's going to be projects like, and I'm going to pick on Grant Road for the moment. Grant Road is in effect not going to be done at the time we're making these decisions. So we can look at maybe a segment meeting certain segment projects or successes, but the ability to look at it for the full length of the project is not going to be there until probably after the people vote on the ballot. So we need to keep this in perspective as to what we can get from this on some of these particularly larger or later in the round projects.
Good point.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions for David?
Yeah, Thomas Arlen. It's maybe not so much a question as a comment. As we move forward with the performance assessment of things, I just want to reiterate, I think something we've said before, that in keeping with this concept of complete streets and wanting to make sure that everything is addressed, to perhaps if we find performance assessment tools or measures that, and measures really what I meant, that cross some of our goals, that serve multiple goals, and one thing can address multiple goals, that would be good. And as well as making sure that that everything that we do as performance assessment isn't automatically first thing geared toward automobile traffic. It's not that we ignore it, but it's automobile traffic as it relates to bicycle, pedestrian, eventually transit, and eventually automated vehicles as well. I just wanted to get that on the record.
Yeah, I agree with that. We learned at our last meeting some of the limitations of some of the alternate modes data in maybe something as simple as a million miles traveled of bicycles. If you have a high use bike city versus a low use bike city, then comparing supposedly in other respects peer communities becomes somewhat problematic. So those are all things we have to be aware of as we try to come up with the metrics and the performance measures.
Right, because the best available data may not be what we have for bikes, and
Yeah.
what do other jurisdictions do to measure that? How do we measure that so that we have a baseline from which to start?
Yep, agreed with that. All right, any other questions?
Yes, I do. This is Mel.
Okay, Mel.
Again, on Grant Road, as an example, how committed are we to whatever is the current plan? And how open are we to revisiting issues that may have been rejected? And I'll be specific, the Bantham interchange at Grant and Campbell may be a lot more feasible now that Bookman's isn't there. I don't know any of the other details, but the question is a general one. What role do we have in looking at alternative design concepts within the plans going forward?
In other words, can we make the new plan modify the current plan?
Correct. And I don't know enough about Bantham interchanges or intelligent roads, but that's something that, how do we gain that knowledge to be able to then apply it to the plan?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, and then I might pass it back on to Rick. So as Rick mentioned earlier, there's a very extensive process beginning with the design concept report and obviously looking at all the technical issues. So typically at this level, we don't get to that level of technical issues. We allow the lead agency through a very extensive process to conduct obviously the design concept report and all the traffic studies and everything else that follows. So more specifically on grant, I can pass it on to Rick and he can tell you how far along they are. But again, if there's an extensive process already underway and there is a design concept report that's approved, I would say we want to honor those studies and the commitments. But I'll pass it on to Rick that he can tell you more about grant and what the status is, and they're pretty far along, I believe.
So Mel, to take that and run with it a little further, so those big corridors that we were talking about and that I was describing earlier, like a Grant, like a Silver Bell, Houghton, or a Tangerine, essentially they've looked at all of those aspects you're talking about, and they've identified that initial corridor design, that vision, that concept that I was talking about. So I believe all those projects have looked at it from that standpoint and have approved a basic concept of what that ultimate configuration will look like. There are some tweaks that can be reconciled, but considering that was a approved plan, that was part of a package that was put before voters, there's a high degree of necessity to conform to that to the maximum degree possible. If there are variations that can enhance it or still achieve that functionality and minimal modifications, reduce impact, reduce cost, that's all part of a value applied engineering principle that's going to be utilized and approached as much as possible. But generally, all those corridors have been led through those efforts by the jurisdictions, by the project teams, and kind of have a concept and a vision that they want to adhere to and want to fulfill, and the subsequent stages are then working to implement. Does that answer your question? And does that tie in with Farhad's lead in?
Well, I understand then for current projects that are already far ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I would like to know, I mean, if you have something that suggests something that, well, we should take another look at it, that would be of value. And then more directly than in future areas, how are we then dependent procedurally, whatever the various jurisdictions provide, we bless? Is that it? Or I'm not really understanding our role then.
So Mr. Chair, if I may, again, Mel, as part of that collaboration between the Technical Management Committee and the Citizens Committee, that opportunity exists for the CAC to take a position on a specific project, whether it's being proposed or not. So that conversation is going to continue between the two committees. So that's the kind of a product of the committee work. And ultimately, at some point between the two committees, hopefully there is a consensus on what projects and what segments of projects should proceed in the plan. And then that's where the technical decision has to be made as well, whether it's just for the sake of an example, whether it's an underpass or overpass, or it's continue to stay at grade, those kind of conversations. Those are the conversations that need to continue on as we refine the plan and develop a scope and a cost estimate. So yes, that's definitely a purview of the CAC to continue to have ideas and discussions, and TMC will look at it and respond to you, and hopefully we'll reach a consensus at some point. Again, there are trade-offs in the conversation, and I would say one of the trade-offs would be that if you've recently completed a project, do you want to go back and redo it? That's kind of one of the questions that I think everybody would want to ask.
Mel, to expand on that and kind of to hit upon the thing that you were touching upon as well. So even on the big active corridors where there is a concept and there is a vision that is in place, if the circumstances, situations, and it has to be within the context of, is it still fulfill the functional vision of the approved upon plan? So if there are some tweaks, modifications, or different configurations that still allow that while reducing cost, reducing impact, then the jurisdictions are of course going to take a look at that and choose to evaluate the benefits of that and the potential compatibility with that. So that does happen. Jurisdictions do take those responsibilities, and they would be looking at that if that's an enhancement, not just necessarily a change. And as long as it doesn't deviate from that previously approved and agreed upon scope that the voters approved. That's kind of the key litmus that all the jurisdictions are going to come back on and go, that's what we've got to make sure we're holding firm to, along with the performance, the functionality, that everything hits and touches and feels like everything that was originally envisioned as well.
Hey, Tom, this is John Bernal.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Thank you. The discussion raises a question for me about timing. I think Farhad said at the beginning that we would at some point be involving ourselves with inputting both the CAC and the TMC, inputting to the long range plan update. And something as significant as was mentioned as a grade separated intersection on two arterials, certainly I would think would be an element of a longer range outlook. So I'm just questioning, what is our expectation for updating the long range plan and being able to say to the citizenry, our RTA 2 is reflective of that long range plan and its elements?
So Mr. Chair, Mr. Bernal, it's a catch-22 process. Obviously, we want to make sure that anything that ends up in the plan is also in the long-range plan, and we'll just have to see from a timing perspective if there are things that are already in the plan. That's fine. If they're not in the plan, we would have to make a decision at that point. Once you have a draft RTA, do we want to update our plan at that time, or if it's something that there is general consensus and support for it, we can move forward with the RTA election. And once it's approved, at that time, we can come back and update the long range plan. So again, keep in mind, the long range plan is obviously as an aspirational document for the region, and it's required only by the federal government to make sure that anything that you are going to invest in, particularly if you're spending federal dollars on, to make sure it's in there. But obviously we include non-federal dollars in our long range plan. So I would say that is not a critical path issue. It's an issue that we know we have to address. And once you have a plan completed, we would have to make that decision. Do we update the long range plan before the election or after election? And I think we have plenty of time to make that hopefully decision.
Thank you, Farhad. The reason the topic is of interest to me, if you recall, when there was a long-range plan that had a system of bantam interchanges or grade separated interchanges, it was rejected. The entire plan was. Now, I think the example that 22nd and Keno shows that that's a pretty good idea if it can work systematically. And I'm not sure we're ready to go down that path, but I'm just saying there is some reason to be concerned about what message we'll be giving the public if we can't talk about a long-range plan.
Definitely, I agree. And again, it's one of those things that as we go through our public outreach and input process, we can gauge that and be able to demonstrate that is there support for those kind of projects. And if there isn't, then that'll be a feedback that comes to you, and then you would decide if you want to even consider projects that there may not be support for. Again, it's a excellent point to keep an eye on, but I would say it's definitely something that you would want to discuss once you have a draft plan. And if you do identify certain projects that may consider that additional level of public involvement and updating the long-range plan, then we would have to do that at that time.
Thank you.
Can I make a
Thank you.
comment? Number one, as somebody who was actually in the Bantam Interchange CAC all those years ago, I see that might very well, in reference to 22nd and Keno, come back as a question. It is also potentially coming back as something that's suggested. There's been a suggestion made by one of the city council people regarding a major east-west corridor, which is golf links, that there be some improvements of those same kind of nature. So there's a possibility that some of these will come forward from, in this case, the city effort on Move Tucson. I understand they're looking at that issue as to whether to look at some of those kind of corridors. So I think this is a topic that we need to keep an eye on as we look at those plans and see if there's something that's being talked about along those lines. And obviously, the city plan is a crucial element as to whether something like that would be proposed.
Good insight. Thanks, Dale. Any other questions for David or any of our other experts? All right, let's move on to item number 6. Paki will speak to us for a few minutes about public involvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, CAC members. And thank you for all the feedback this afternoon on public involvement. As Farhad mentioned earlier, when we get to stages 3 and 4, the critical stages of the plan, that will be very critical to our public involvement process. I'm trying to move the slide here. So while I'm waiting for that, last year, exactly a year ago, I believe it was, I did a brief overview of our public involvement process to the CAC. So my presentation today, what I wanted to do is just do a brief recap and then let you know where we are on the process now. So I'm having trouble moving.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead and click on the slide and try using the down arrow and see if that works for you.
There we go. Okay, thank you, everyone. So just to recap, part of the public involvement process is public outreach. And as I mentioned, and as you all know, for the last 4 years, we've been sharing RTA's story. We've been going out to the region and educating the public on the current RTA and also the development of a new RTA. We've presented to more than 162 groups, and we've reached more than 4,300 people across the region. Our highlights have been, highlighting RTA's success through all sorts of social media platforms, websites, newsletter articles, videos, and photos. Again, the goal of the public outreach component is we want the community to gain a realistic understanding of what the transportation funding climate is like and what it could be like, potential funding options, the economic benefits of investing in our transportation infrastructure. The short-term objective while we're doing our public outreach is building awareness of this RTA Next plan, the development efforts, seeking to understand what the voters are going to support when we finally have the election, and also how to extend that tax. Some of the facts that we can now share about, during this public outreach process is the RTA delivers. Economic swings do impact the transportation funding. State funding options are stagnant, and the RTA flexible funding option supports the economy. One of the things that you've heard in the past is, for the first time, we have 5 generations that will be able to participate in the voting process. And because of this, we want to be inclusive in the RTA investments. They benefit all of us. So for example, the silent generation, which is our oldest floating generation at the moment, you know, the focus for the silent generation is a quality transportation system helps us stay connected. The self-funding offers flexible options to meet regional priority transportation needs. The RTA delivers on your investment, and the RTA also improves safety, offers other travel mode choices, and embraces technology for all generations. That's what we're hearing from the silent generation. The baby boomer generation, the focus has been on the RTA provides the transportation options, deliver what you ask for, and help us make the right choices in plan development. The Generation X focuses on the details are in the plan. You know, we want your feedback. The RTA gets results. The RTA is working for you. The millennials are all about collaborating, being on the team to advance our transportation system. Tell your friends that the RTA offers multimodal choices. This transportation plan offers projects that are meaningful to you. And then finally, Generation Z is getting involved to improve those transportation choices that you can help make those decisions. Our transportation needs are many. You can help address them, making a difference, and your ideas count. And again, the purpose for going over these is just to remind you that there's something for everyone in this plan. And it's very important as we move forward that we understand our audience, our voters out there, and who they are and what's important to them. Some of the channels that you're maybe aware of, and some new channels, especially now that we're more in virtual status, is you know, we're still doing presentations to diverse community groups virtually at the moment, but we're doing them. We've got Facebook posts, of course, targeted social media booths. We've got digital ads and geocoded ads to reach all the mobile users. Podcasts, you know, we're trying to do some more podcasts and media that we'll be running. Focused website, and then we have the chatbot, which are the more instant conversations that you've been seeing in some of the platforms. We have infographics and digital brochures and fact sheets to provide a visual and illustrate the plan and what we're looking for. We've got e-newsletters, marketing, pop-up events, digital surveys, and then of course meetings open to the public. And all of these are focused on kind of the generations that I just mentioned a while ago. So part of our informed plan development is really looking for additional public input opportunities. So as we move forward, you know, the CAC, you're all going to draft your new RTA plan, and you're going to do that based on early public input on the goals, which you received some of that when we did the survey last fall, which I'll mention in a second. The RTA right now seeks extensive public feedback on draft plan elements and plan projects, and will do even more so as we move forward. The CAC is going to finalize the draft using the public feedback. You're then going to recommend a draft for the RTA board to approve. The RTA will then seek broad regional endorsements of the plan, and then of course the RTA board will approve the plan, set an election date for the plan and for the tax ballot initiatives. One example this chart shows is when we did the survey last fall on the 9 adopted goals at that time, we took the rankings of the strongly agree goals. And this is actually, I think Dave Mitchell showed you that on one of his performance measure slides of 4 of them. These are the 9 and how they rounded out. So for example, improving the conditions of the existing roadways. This is the proportional percentages. This came out on top. And then of course the next, there were 3 that tied for the 12%, which was the providing safer bicycle and pedestrian facilities, reducing crashes at intersections, and reducing congestion. So this is just an example of what we're doing with the information that we're receiving, how we can look at it and kind of weigh in where the region stands. And I think the most important thing is, working together to tell our story, continue to wear regional hats. This is about investing in our future. We want to work together to gain that broad community support of the RT investment plan. And we want to ensure that we will have a safe and reliable regional transportation system. And we want something that meets our mobility and accessibility needs of the future. The feedback that I've heard today will also help us to craft, more public involvement opportunities and ensure that everyone's providing the information that they need. So with that, if there are any questions, if not, I'll turn it over to the chair.
I have a question. It's not really a question. This is Mary. Can you all hear me?
Sure,
Yes,
go
hi.
ahead, Mary.
Mine is more of a comment. One thing that we can all be doing is taking what you post on social media and then repost it to our own social groups. And I think that's a strong way of getting the word out. But also, I don't think necessarily everybody realizes just how many social groups they're involved with. So getting that social media piece going, I know you've been, Paki, you guys have been doing a lot of social posts, and I myself use every way possible to extend that reach to my social folks and then to other areas where I know other people will also, forward that out as well. And that's the wonder of social media, getting the word out. So I just wanted to add that we should also take advantage of the social media in our own bubble, so to speak, to continue to push that word out.
Yes, thank you, Mary. That is actually something that our communication department works, tirelessly on. And as we move forward, you'll see more of that. I'll make sure that once PEG has information to post and to share, I'll immediately move it over to all of you so that you can post it on your platforms as well. So thank you.
And I'm more than willing to help anybody who needs help, a little help or guidance with social media. I'm more than happy to help them, to that end.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mary.
Mary will be our remedial social network teacher.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Oh, Tom, and this is Carolyn. I have a question.
Okay, Carolyn.
Paki, do you all know when your website will be back up? It's been being worked on for a while, and I think that would be helpful too. Is that coming soon?
We had some issues over the last couple of months, but we do have a new temporary website up. And if you, that link that I sent all of you on the RTA Next, that is one of the options. You can also go to the rtamobility.com to see all of the current RTA information. I'd be happy to send you all links if you need, but we do have the websites up. They're just not as extensive as they were before, but we are adding to them on a regular basis.
Okay, so there's another one besides just the main PAG RTA website that there's really not much on there, and it says it's under construction. We go to an RTA mobility site. Is that what you said?
Let me look for you. I'll hunt around for you. Yes, there is, but let me send you what I think that you need.
Okay.
So Paki, let me answer that question if I may. So rtamobility.com, that is the RTA website that is up. And then there's the RTA Next website that's been up all along. So for the purpose of this committee, we're using the RTA Next website, and that's been up all along. That's the RTA Mobility that we've upgraded that, and that's up as well. So sometimes you might have to refresh your browser if for some reason you're still going to the old under maintenance site. You might want to refresh your browser and try it again. You should be able to go to the rtamobility.com after that.
Okay, well, I just did it, but I will, it just takes me to pagregion.com. So I will, I'll figure that out, or maybe I can get some help from Mary.
Thank you.
Great, can you fix that for us? No, just kidding.
Yeah, sure. She will.
Thanks for bringing that up, Carolyn. We'll definitely follow up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Paki. Before we adjourn, any questions that folks have of any of our presenters today and/or thoughts about future meetings, please speak up before we close out our meeting.
Tom, this is Carolyn again. I do have a suggestion for our future meetings, and that is simply to start having on our agenda at the end a future agenda item, so we can have a discussion about future agenda items. I've been kind of making a note of some of the things we've brought up before, such as a big one, I think, are additional categories that might be included in the RTA next. One of them that continues to come up is technology. Last time we heard, or a couple times ago, I think, about education and outreach. And then there's pavement preservation, which is, kind of a looming one. We're talking about future maintenance being included possibly, but there's all the maintenance that we have right now. So those are just a few of them. And I think that might be a time, now that we're kind of sounds like we're going to be getting going pretty soon, according to Farhad, then I think it would be good to have a dedicated time where we can discuss as a committee what kind of things we want to talk about. Another thing related to that is, I know we've talked about subcommittees, and the transit committee met once, and there was a suggestion on a couple of occasions about a technology subcommittee, but in any event, that was my suggestion. But then I have a question also for Paki and for Farhad, and that is, is our transit subcommittee going to have some kind of a meeting like this soon? Well, I guess that's really all. Is I'm wondering if there's going to be any more options.
Yes, we're planning on having a transit subcommittee hopefully in August, and obviously we'll send out the information to all the subcommittee members. Everyone else that is not a member of the subcommittee would still be able to use the YouTube option to see and obviously follow along if they like to. But obviously we do have to follow the open meeting laws on the subcommittee and the membership of the subcommittee, and making sure that we don't have a quorum of the CAC. So that's going to be the only criteria there. But yeah, we'll follow up with an email with more specifics on that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And I think that was the only subcommittee that we formed, although there were suggestions before, but we can deal with that at future. So thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Carolyn. Any other questions, comments?
John Holden here. I have one request.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, the speakers are very informative as always, but there's not a whole lot of identification here, at least as I'm sitting here. I've had the chairman's picture up and nobody else has shown up on the screen here. So I don't know who's speaking. I don't know if we can, put a graphic up or something so they'd have better identification in case we want to come back and address them, one-on-one for a follow-up on a question or something.
Sure,
That's
we'll be
good.
happy to.
I
we'll
brought
be happy
that
to
up
make sure they have
during the
video.
meeting also.
Okay, unfortunately, you had two people talking there, but yeah, if there's a way to just perhaps have a better ID on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Agreed. We'll work on that for sure. Thanks, John. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second, John Holden.
Very good. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right. We are now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tom.
Tom.